Good evening, everyone, and welcome to CambriLearn's Neurodiversity webinar. We are so happy to have you here with us today for a conversation about how online learning can be a game changer for neurodivergent students. My name is Andrea. I'm your host for this session, and before we begin, we'd like to give a huge thank you to the Neurodiversity Centre for partnering with us in this amazing initiative. We really hope that this presentation will not only give you valuable insight into the learning journey of neurodiverse students, but also practical strategies that when put into place can truly make a difference in their lives. Just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. This webinar is going to run for about 45 minutes, and we've saved time at the end for a live Q&A session. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chat box throughout the session, and we will do our best to answer as many as possible. Another note is just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded, so a replay will be available for those who have registered. So if you've joined us today, the chances are that you are looking for ways to better support a neurodiverse learner, whether you're a parent, an educator, or someone who is just passionate about inclusive education. We know that this journey can come with its challenges, but it also brings incredible opportunities. And one such opportunity that we're here to discuss today is online learning, which is often a fantastic fit for neurodivergent students. It gives them the flexibility, the structure, and an individualized approach that they need to succeed. So in today's webinar, we're going to explore exactly that, the world of neurodiversity. We're going to unpack key executive functioning strategies and discuss how the right learning environment can really help these students reach their full potential, not just academically, but in life. Joining us today is our expert guest speaker from the Neurodiversity Centre to discuss this topic. And by the end of the session, we really hope you walk away feeling informed, empowered, and ready to take action. So we have Shahida Musa here with us today. She is an occupational therapist and the owner of a practice that specializes in neurodiversity. Shahida's work centers around mental health, sensory processing, and vocational rehabilitation, and she is dedicated to creating a positive therapeutic environment that caters for the individual needs of her clients across their lifespans. Thank you so much, Shahida, for joining us today. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Welcome and thank you everyone for being here today. Whether you're a parent, an educator, or a facilitator, you play an essential role in a neurodivergent child's learning journey. The way that we approach education has changed, and for many neurodivergent students, online learning has provided an opportunity to learn in an environment that better suits their needs. I'm just checking that everyone can see the slides. There we go. Okay. However, while online learning removes many of the challenges of these traditional classrooms like sensory overload, rigid structures, and overwhelming social demands, it also presents us with some obstacles as in a traditional schooling. Students may struggle with disengagement, executive functioning demands, and emotional dysregulation. Parents may worry about screen time, motivation, or the lack of structure, while teachers may be unsure about how to foster these meaningful engagements with their students who keep their cameras off or remain silent in online meetings. But there is one key idea that I would like to emphasize tonight from the start, and that is that the best learning happens when students feel safe, supported, and understood. Because when we remove unnecessary barriers and build on their strengths, students not only engage, but they can thrive. So today we're going to explore some practical strategies to create learning environments, both online and at home, that can support this engagement, focus, and self-regulation for neurodivergent students. Let's begin by looking at something that often causes us a lot of concern, and that is the use of cameras in online learning. One of the most common concerns in online learning is when students keep their cameras off. Parents and teachers, you might often see this as a lack of participation, or you might assume that the student isn't paying attention. But for many neurodivergent learners, keeping their cameras off is often a necessity and not a sign of disengagement. For these students, having their cameras on can create cognitive overload. Seeing themselves on the screen can be distracting and uncomfortable, while the feeling of being watched in a grid of faces may trigger some social anxiety. And therefore, I'm very happy that all of your cameras are off today. And sensory sensitivities can also play a role, like bright lights, visual clutter, and the unpredictability of video calls can make focusing incredibly difficult. So instead of forcing our students to turn on their cameras, a better approach is to offer alternative ways of engaging, such as using chat features, reaction buttons, or small breakout rooms, which can provide the opportunity for participation without adding unnecessary stress. Because when students are given control over how they engage, they are far more likely to contribute meaningfully. Beyond this live participation, another essential tool for supporting neurodivergent learners, which online learning provides, is recorded lessons. Many neurodivergent students have different processing speeds. So some need extra time to absorb information, while others struggle with what we call working memory, and they may forget details mid-task. So having access to lesson recordings allows them to review the content in their own pace, pause when needed, and then revisit the concepts as often as necessary. And this simple shift can reduce anxiety, increase accessibility, and ensure that our students are not just keeping up, but they're learning. So providing students with the lessons, transcripts, or key takeaways can allow them to revisit the material in a way that makes sense to them. Many neurodivergent individuals also have executive functioning difficulties, and they struggle with task initiation and sustained attention, which are our executive functions. And one way to support neurodivergent students who struggle with getting started or having focus is through something called regulation doubling, also known as body doubling or parallel working. And this approach essentially involves working alongside someone else without the expectation of direct interaction. This enhances focus and reduces the cognitive overload. Dr. Megan Enanaf, a clinical psychologist, researcher, neurodiversity advocate, and writer, beautifully describes this concept through the lens of social baseline theory and mirror neuron theory. Social baseline theory suggests that human brains are wired to function optimally in the presence of others. So when another person is present, our brain perceives this workload as lighter, making tasks feel more manageable. And this explains why body doubling, such as studying or working alongside someone else, can be particularly beneficial. It reduces the mental strain of completing tasks alone and fosters a sense of shared effort. And then we have mirror neurons, which are linked to motivation. So, just as our yawns are contagious, our mirror neurons make us more likely to engage in tasks when we see others doing the same. So watching someone focus on a task can activate similar neural pathways in our brains, increasing our motivation and our ability to concentrate. For our students, this means that simply being in the presence of others online who are engaged in work can naturally boost their own focus and engagement. But how do we implement this in the realm of online learning? Teachers and parents, you can establish a culture of parallel learning at the beginning of the school year or essentially after this webinar by introducing the concept to your students. You could consider saying something like, in our online classes, we spend lots of time learning together. And during this time, you might feel that working alongside someone else, even virtually, can make the task feel easier. I personally, as your teacher, your parent, find it helpful to work when someone else in my home is working, because when other people are focused, it's easier for me to focus too. We need to allow our students, our children, to gradually discover who they feel comfortable working alongside with and to initiate these connections themselves. I want to emphasize that. But in order for this to happen, parents and teachers must introduce and normalize this concept first. Because just as rituals are learned by examples, our students need to see and experience this practice before they can begin incorporating it into their own learning routines. And progress in establishing this habit may take a lot of time. So even if a student starts engaging in parallel working, body doubling by the second half of the year, that is already a meaningful step towards building a practice that is going to help sustain them through their high school process. Now that we've covered how the learning environment itself impacts engagement, let's talk about what teachers can do to make an online learning more accessible. What I want to emphasize here is that we need to be precise, clear, and structured, because one of the barriers to engagement for these students is uncertainty. When instructions are vague or our expectations are unclear, the cognitive load increases, making it harder to focus and process information. Teachers, you can support your learners by starting each lesson with a structured outline, breaking tasks into small, clear steps, and explicitly stating your expectations. If you find that there's no engagement in your classroom that day, instead of saying, I need more engagement, you might consider saying something like, today I would love if each of you could share one thought about this topic in the chat by the end of the lesson. We need to be precise, clear, and structured. Because when we are clear and predictable, our students feel safer and more prepared to participate. By specific, they need to know what, when, and how things are going to happen so that they can stay engaged without unnecessary stress. It's also important for us to recognize that neurodivergent students are highly attuned to authenticity. They pick up on a teacher's emotional state, and they can sense when someone is uncomfortable or uncertain. The best approach isn't to force a teaching style that doesn't feel natural to you, but it's about leaning into what feels comfortable for you as an educator. When teachers are confident and comfortable, students are more likely to engage positively. Because they're so highly attuned to authenticity, if you as the teacher or the facilitator or the tutor are uncomfortable, anxious, or uncertain, your learner will sense it and they're going to disengage. Your comfort creates a trust-based learning process where they feel safe enough to participate. So just be yourself. Another key strategy here is offering opt-in participation, similar to the cameras on policy. Instead of cold calling students, which increases intense anxiety because they're being put on the spot, this can then lead to what we call the freeze response rather than engagement. What happens here is that our sympathetic nervous system kicks in, fight, flight, freeze, and this is activated in response to a perceived threat or stressor. In this case, the perceived threat or stressor is being put on the spot. And this results in difficulty accessing the higher order performance components, also known as our executive functions. Because of the impact that this stressor has had, it has hyper-aroused state on our cognitive functioning. And then we have a child who has difficulty reasoning in a social situation because of this trigger, or they have difficulty engaging productively in the lesson. So instead of pressuring our students to respond immediately, we need to provide multiple ways to participate. Again, by typing responses, using reactions, or joining small groups before sharing with the class. And this can create a more inclusive learning environment because participation is optional rather than forced. And this is where we create a space where the students can feel safe to engage at their own terms. At the core of all these strategies, which is opt-in, participation, flexible engagement, and parallel working, are three essential ingredients that I would like to highlight: context, choice, and connection. To sum it up, the most effective way to engage neurodivergent learners is to ensure that they feel purpose, autonomy, and support. And we do that by giving them context. We need to help them see why the learning matters. When they understand how a lesson fits into their world, they're more likely to engage. We need to provide these children with choice. We need to give them options in how they participate, because when they have control over how they participate, they're more likely to stay involved, whether it's selecting the format for their work or choosing between an independent or group task. Autonomy is what fosters motivation. And finally, connection, because trust comes before engagement. When students feel safe and supported, they're more willing to take risks, ask for help, and stay engaged. By us applying these 3 C's for engagement, we are supporting these neurodivergent minds, increasing participation, and truly making education accessible. Of course, engagement doesn't just happen in the classroom. Parents play a crucial role in supporting online learning at home. We need to focus on a safe learning space first. So parents, if you're thinking of what is the first step, it is a safe learning space, because engagement happens online, but it takes on the role of the physical space. One of the most powerful ways of ensuring that you are supporting your students or your children is by creating an intentional learning space that helps your child's brain transition into focus mode. Parents assume that because online learning happens on a screen, the location doesn't matter. But our brains associate spaces with specific activities. And when those associations are blurred, it can make focusing on learning much harder. So the first step is to identify what a safe and effective learning space looks like for your child. And that starts with asking them, where do you feel comfortable working? What do you need in your environment to focus? We can do a sensory and physical audit that can help determine the ideal conditions for learning. Considerations could be, does your child need white noise? Do they need a comfortable chair? Do they need minimal background distractions? How can we ensure that the environment provides the least number of interruptions, where people aren't coming in and out of the space, so that we reduce stress and increase focus? But to this, there's another layer, and this layer is what we call brain priming and environmental associations. Again, Dr. Neff highlights how our brains rely on associations to create mental shortcuts. So if a space is used for multiple overlapping functions, like studying, playing, and relaxing all in the same spot, it can create mental fatigue and difficulty transitioning between tasks. This is because our brains don't just respond to the task itself, they're also taking cues from the environment. When a space is consistently associated with focus, it helps prime the brain for learning. But if that same spot is also used for rest or entertainment, it can be harder for the brain to switch gears. What we need to do here is to make transitions easier. We need to consider distinct spaces for different activities. A learning space that signals it's time to focus, a relaxation space that cues rest and regulation. You could even consider something like a worry corner where anxious thoughts can be processed. By framing our physical spaces like this, we reduce the mental effort that it takes to transition from one task to the other, and we prevent the overwhelming feeling of needing to do everything all at once. Regulation, parents, it starts with you. If your child is dysregulated, if you are dysregulated, your child will feel it. Here I want to emphasize that as parents, you do not place your affective state on your child. Because just as teachers set the tone in the classroom, parents, you set your emotional tone at home. Again, neurodivergent children are highly sensitive to the parents' emotions. If you as a parent are overwhelmed, anxious, or frustrated, your child will often absorb that stress, making learning even harder. So before trying to help your child with schoolwork, it might be worth checking in with yourself. Are you regulated? Are you creating pressure? Or are you providing support? Because sometimes the best way to help your child learn is to first ensure that you yourself are in a state of calm. These children are highly attuned to the parents' emotional states. So if you approach them feeling anxious, they are going to absorb that energy and withdraw rather than asking or seeking for support. By you prioritizing your own emotional regulation, you're creating an environment where your child feels secure, supported, and ready to learn. Our learners mirror the emotional states of those around them. So before pushing them into learning mode, check in with yourself. Are you calm? Are you patient? And are you ready to provide support? Now that we've completed an effective audit, we're ready to provide executive functioning support or scaffolding. And when we provide this support, it's important to understand how learners prefer the help. Some children thrive with direct guidance, while others benefit more from sort of a gentle check-in or independent problem solving. But if a child associates help with stress or anxiety, they're going to avoid asking for it altogether. So again, you start off providing the support by simply asking, how would you like me to support you? Would you prefer a break or a different approach? Because neurodivergent learners are most engaged when two things are in place: interest in the learning task and a strong relationship with you as the tutor, the parent, the teacher, the facilitator. It's essential that we recognize how your child feels about the help and adjust our approaches accordingly. So if you offer a help in a way that triggers anxiety, such as hovering or being too directive with your support, your child will likely avoid asking for that help in the future. We need to understand and learn what scaffolding methods are useful for your child, and then create a system that is most effective for them. So for example, some children might simply just need a wake-up call to get started, while others might appreciate a comforting gesture like a cup of tea to make the process smoother. It's important that you and your child understand their unique neurodivergence, because for them to feel comfortable in their neurodivergence is crucial before they can engage in learning. Because comfort leads to presence, which in turn enhances their ability to learn. The overall goal here is to foster an environment where the child feels safe and engaged enough to participate in learning. Practical example, a child with pathological demand avoidance may feel so overwhelmed by stress that they are unable to absorb any information. In this case, you want to first create a low arousal environment, create a less stressful working environment, provide appropriate scaffolds and support by asking your child what do they need, but also seeking the support of professionals, such as working with a therapist or psychiatrist, is vital in this state. For children with ADHD, offering co-regulation objects like something to doodle with and fidgets can help them focus while learning. These objects allow them to stay engaged and calm, making it easier for them to concentrate with the task at hand. But truly understanding how your child learns and what kind of support they need based on their unique neurodivergence, we're able to build a system that works for them, not against them. This way, the scaffolding enhances their learning experiences rather than overwhelms them with techniques and tools and tips that might not be effective to their unique neurodivergence. To conclude, to unlock a neurodivergent child's potential in online learning, we must focus on safety, flexibility, and connection. Teachers, be clear structured and authentic. Parents, prioritize your regulation and supportive spaces. And by creating the right conditions, we allow our students to learn, thrive, and grow in ways that align with their unique brains. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shahida. You really shared some valuable and practical strategies with us today, and I'm sure our audience has taken away some really great tips and insights as parents and as educators or teachers. Now, we're really excited to share something really special with everyone. CambriLearn and the Neurodiversity Centre are exploring a potential collaboration to create an online community focused on neuro-inclusive homeschooling. This would be a dedicated space for support where parents who are navigating homeschooling can come together, share experiences, and then access expert guidance as well. But to make this community as valuable as possible, we need to hear from you as the parents. So we've put together a short survey to understand your needs and really shape the space in a way that truly supports you. So if you are interested in being part of this, please take a few minutes to share your thoughts. We have put a survey link in the chat, and we really can't wait to build this together with you. Now, we're going to open the floor for our live Q&A session. Some fantastic questions have come in, and we're going to answer as many as possible in the remaining time that we have. But any questions that we do not get to will be compiled, and they're going to be emailed out to you along with the recording of tonight's webinar. So, Shahida, can I have your go ahead?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Okay, so first question for you, Shahida, is how can I tell if my child is truly disengaged or just needs a different way to participate?
That is a very important question because it takes us back to looking at whether the tools and techniques that are used for engagement, as well as the executive functions like concentration and sustained attention are at play, or if we need to sort of look at the environment, okay? And in order to do that, obviously, you would need to perhaps even just ask your child first. Often, they know themselves best. Is it that, you're finding the content boring? Is it not engaging for you? Especially, I'm assuming there's ADHD here, or let's assume there's ADHD, or even any sort of neurodivergence. Interest, like I mentioned in the talk, is very, very key. So they might be disengaged because the content is not interesting. They are not understanding where it fits in. So the context of the content, why am I learning this? Why is this beneficial to me? But yeah, as a parent, or as a teacher, I would first start asking the child the simple question of, are you disengaged? Is the content accessible to you? Is it interesting? And then making a decision from there. If you're really worried about attention and, your child being able to focus and concentrate during lessons, you'd obviously need to seek the help of professionals, double checking in with therapists or the psychiatrist as well, if there's other avenues that need to be researched.
Absolutely, yes. So I definitely think that speaks to, the need for students to have a tailored, individualized approach to education so that they can stay engaged and, the learning becomes fun for them. And it's not something repetitive that they disengage from. Absolutely. Another question we have here is, I au pair / facilitate for an 11-year-old boy who is currently doing grade 3 work. He has ASD level 1 and PDA. He isn't currently actively enrolled in a school, and we have been looking into joining homeschooling. His PDA makes it difficult to do any work. His resistance can be violent at times. And how could I motivate him to do online schooling?
Okay. Obviously, I'm going to answer in a generalized case, not specifically to this child. I mean, in order to answer for him, we would, as a team, need to, assess. So just putting a disclaimer out there. But we're looking at PDA in general. PDAs need safety and regulation. Okay, if they feel comfortable in their physical environment and their space, and they feel comfortable with whoever is providing that content, and they feel safe, they will be a lot more likely to engage. With PDAs also, if they are engaged in any sort of learning activity, we would need to ensure that it's of interest to them and that it's not demanding in a sense of this has to be done, but rather exploring alternative ways of engaging with that content. So, indirect questions like, I wonder what, I wonder what it feels like if we boiled water and threw something in it, and that sort of will initiate some sort of curiosity and interest, which then leads to learning. Learning for PDAs is not linear. It's not in the way that it happens in your traditional classroom, because there needs to be interest and there needs to be no demands on that. So create a safe, comfortable space, a learning space, an environment, foster a wonderful, safe relationship with the child that you are au pairing for, and think of creative, out of the way ways of, just, speaking about the topic that isn't directive and using declarative language. I hope that isn't a mouthful but answers your question.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So we have another question here. How can I help my child transition from needing constant support to working more independently?
Again, it just depends on what scaffolds they need. A lot of times, it's, about the kind of supports we provide. So we'd often start with, for example, physical support, where I'm going to show you how to do the thing. Then it might be just a verbal support where you're speaking it. We can transition over to a visual support where instead of telling you what to do, I'm giving you a checklist of how to do it. And eventually, you might not even need that at the end. But it does start with understanding what kind of support your child needs, and then providing the highest level of support, seeing how you can gradually decrease that. So we call it like downgrading the support from physical to perhaps verbal to visual, to maybe just prompting the child. But again, it's so, it's context specific and it's child specific and it's subject specific. So it's really hard to answer. Another thing is, sometimes your child doesn't need support, they need regulation. And that's where we spoke about, body doubling and the power of just being in the same space and environment as them. So it might not be that your child needs support, but rather co-regulation, and that can be provided by just being in the same space as them, but doing completely different activities. So you could start off by looking at what you are providing, gradually decreasing it. And if that doesn't work, going back up and playing around with the prompts.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it seems like the first step is an investigation and to see what the child needs, because it's really not one size fits all. So, like you said, it's you build it up and you build those techniques up and you find what works best for the child, right? Okay, we have one more question here is, how do we advocate for accommodations or flexibility from a school that doesn't fully understand neurodiversity?
Yeah, it's advocacy and sensitization is the key. If the individuals, teachers, schools that are working with our children don't understand them, they cannot provide the correct support. If there is a team that your child is seeing and working with, if they're seeing a OT, psychologist, psychiatrist, my suggestion would be that you speak to them and ask them to do sensitization and advocacy in the work in the school environment. So, for example, I often will visit and speak to my clients' schools, workplaces, universities. And by doing that, I'm opening up a conversation and a dialogue about the specific child's, neurodivergence, because no two neurodivergences are the same. So if they might think they understand autism, they might think they understand ADHD, but do they understand your child's autism and ADHD? So yeah, having one of the professionals or members in the MDT go into the school, advocate for a child, do some sensitization training. You could reach out to, the center and ask the school to reach out to the center for training and support. And that is the first step. So they need to be educated, and you as a parent can provide them with that training and support. And then obviously looking at with the educational psychologist, what does the Western Cape Department of Health, or whichever Department of Health you're with, what are the regulations and rules for concessions? Does your child meet those? And what is required for that to be put in place? And then, using that approach, I think, would be the first step.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's super imperative that we have people like yourself, health professionals who have so much experience in this space to advocate for these children and to sort of destigmatize, the difficulties that neurodivergent students often face in a traditional school setting. So it's incredibly important. I think that is about all the time we have for the questions, but like I said, any questions that we haven't gotten to, we will email out to everyone along with the recording. So just to wrap up, Shahida, thank you again. Thank you to the Neurodiversity Centre for your time, your knowledge, and sharing it with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure learning from you. If you want to learn more about neurodiversity as the audience, we really encourage you to visit the Neurodiversity Centre's website to review its resources. And if you would like to know more about how CambriLearn can support your child's unique learning needs, please do not hesitate to contact us. You can actually book a free, no obligation consultation with an education specialist today. And we are offering a special 5% discount to all attendees who sign up during the month of April. Thank you all again for joining us today. We really look forward to seeing you at future webinars, and have a lovely evening.